I must die, you must live to tell my story, to sell my things, to buy a piece of cloth and some strings. Make it a white with a long tail, so that a child somewhere in Gaza, while looking heaven in the eye, awaiting his dad, who left in a blaze and bid no one farewell, not even to his flesh, not even to himself, sees the kite, my kite you made, flying above, and thinks for a moment an angel is there, bringing back love. If I must die, let it bring hope. Let it be a tale. Thank you, Sara. And thanks, Sara, very much for the performance and for bringing us into this evening. Thank you so much. This evening, we've got the AGM business, which we'll start the evening, and then later we've got a panel discussion about philanthropy and race.
So Sado said I shouldn't rush, because I like to rush through these things, but I think as we have to catch up time, I will rush. So I'm just going to deal with all the boring, sort of formal side of the sort of proceedings tonight. So just call the meeting to order. We're definitely quorum, so thank you everyone for turning up. And we've had a few apologies from Ruth Pitter, Lanray Amoso, Helen Farmer, and Alex Rakes. So I think within the packs to the minutes from last year. So unless anyone puts their hand up and says they're not going to be accepted, I'll take them as accepted. Yep, good, thank you. And then I'd like to call Mark Hitchens, our finance manager, up to who's going to run through our accounts. I'm going to explain, there's a note to them. So our accounts are not yet finalised. I'm not sure if you're all aware, but we've been granted a 125-year lease at the Coach House, and this has had an impact on the... But this has impacted on the way our accounts are done. So it's some items of expenditure relating to the refurbishment and maintenance costs will now have to be presented in a different way as a capital asset. This means that there's an adjustment that needs to be done, and so our accounts are not yet finalised. So I'm going to ask all the members to... well, we're presenting the accounts in any event, but I'm going to ask all of you to give us delegated authority to get them signed off. So again, as there's so many of you, unless somebody puts their hands up, I'm going to take that as accepted.
Hi there. I hope everyone's had a chance to have a look over the accounts. I'm very pleased to say that we have had a very 2023 was a very good year for us financially. We seem to be building up strength to strength. The headline figures, the numbers, there is lots of really good stuff in the report which explains what we're doing, what we plan to do, what we have been doing, which is really inspiring. In terms of the actual numbers, our turnover was for the year was just over 140,000. Sorry, 1.4 million. I was thinking I was 5 years ago then. No, that used to be 5,000 back in the day. So yeah, we just have 1.4 million. I'm not used to these big numbers. A total expenditure, this is including unrestricted and restricted funds, a total expenditure of just under £1 million, which has given us a surplus carry forward of 441,000. Obviously some of this is restricted funds. In terms of our unrestricted funds, we had an income of 984,000, total expenditure of just over 623,000, giving us a net income for the year of unrestricted funds of 361,000. So to summarise, I don't know, currently, although we are aware there are going to be some adjustments, if anything these will be positive and will be a positive impact in terms of our funds carry forward. So So basically, at the end of the year, at the end of 2023, we were worth just over 1.4 million, which is an incredible achievement. And for those of you who remember the past, it's some way that we have gone. I don't know if anyone would like to ask me any questions around the accounts. I will try and answer. Are you all happy to? Well, I think it can't be agreed in principle anyway. So unless there's anything else, we can get on to the exciting stuff now.
No, it's not. It's my report now. Sorry.
Oh, no, that's what I meant. Thank you very much.
No, thanks.
Cheers.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, so now is to report, which I'm just going to really run through the year as far as BSWN is concerned. And this is the Chair's report, which does form part of our accounts. Okay, so after the devastating impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, 22-23 should have been a year of shifting into a positive gear. However, the lifting of the final COVID restrictions failed to herald the newfound freedoms it symbolically represented. Rising inflation and interest rates resulted in 75% of black and racially minoritized families unable to afford essential items or to pay for their household bills. The disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on black and racially minoritized communities was further exacerbated by the disproportionate impact of the cost of living crisis. At the same time, reports of widespread institutional discrimination across the police, the fire service and sport perpetuated racial inequity. Data from the census published in 2022 showed ongoing and significant disparities in income, wealth, health, education and housing between the white British population and black and racially minoritized populations in the UK. Yet, despite the evidence in 2022, it began to seem that the global shift on racial justice after the BLM Matters BLM campaign in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder once again began to recede to a footnote in the post-COVID era. Within this climate, BSWN has continued to lead on effecting change at policy level and within the communities we serve. We have continued to deliver innovative enterprise and social enterprise incubation tailored to the needs and aspirations of our black and racially minoritized entrepreneurial communities and developed collaborative partnerships with key organisations to expand our impact regionally. We also secured funding from the National Lottery Heritage Fund to develop and deliver a transformative programme on black cultural heritage at the Coach House and explore what a digital platform that puts the power to define and curate cultural heritage into the hands of communities could look like and feel like, whilst challenging the historical conceptions of mainstream cultural institutions and museums. In tandem, we have continued to research the root causes and solutions to how systemic racism operates and challenge the barriers faced by black and racially minoritized communities across the South West. To this end, we have expanded our range of partnerships and collaborations to explore how we can build the foundations of a region-wide, community-led research capacity that will provide the leadership, data and knowledge to influence policy making from the grassroots. Building BSWN on a sustainable foundation has also guided our decision to move to the second phase of our development of the Coach House. We commissioned Askew Kavanagh Architects to develop plans for a refurbishment of the Coach House into the Centre for Black Enterprise and Culture and negotiated with Bristol City Council to secure a 125-year lease on the building. That was the point I was expecting to clap. We have also collaborated with We Can Make to secure 3 plots of land with Bristol City Council to address complex housing needs through community-led mixed-use developments featuring affordable housing and enterprise units. From BSWN's perspective, community wealth building is not simply about economics, but is also about investing and strengthening social and cultural capital. Our strategy is about black and racially minoritized communities developing and implementing solutions to the issues they face, rather than top-down approaches imposed from above. At the heart of this approach are social enterprises generating local social and economic capital. Alongside this, releasing the cultural capital within black and racially minoritized communities from mainstream interpretations and constraints is equally important. By increasing black and minoritized communities' cultural agency, BSWN aims to achieve social and economic community wealth building and enable the flourishing of diverse individuals in UK society. To achieve economic inclusion, BSWN's enterprise approach is to challenge and address the structural inequalities that lock in disadvantage. We are working to grow the capacity of entrepreneurs to attract investment and grow their enterprises in a way that creates wealth and employment and brings high-value skills to their communities. The current economic climate for enterprise and a cost of living crisis has highlighted a widening gap between low-skilled, low-value enterprise and future-focused, high-skilled and high-value enterprises. BSWN Enterprise will continue to intentionally target key regional growth sectors that include green, technology and culture that are significantly underrepresented in terms of diversity and inclusion. Through our groundbreaking programmes, enterprise incubation and enterprise support, we aim to nurture the diverse talent and innovation within the communities we represent, promote the economic benefits and opportunities in doing so, and enable the aspiration and economic development that delivers sustainable communities. Nearly finished. I would like to take the opportunity to conclude the report by thanking all of those who have contributed to another year where we are shifting the dial towards eradicating racial injustice. In particular, my fellow trustees should be acknowledged for giving up their time to provide support and strategic insight to the executive team. And I'd like to particularly thank Abdi, who has been the treasurer since 2016. He's about to step down, but stay on as a trustee. So I'd like to thank Abdi. Maybe Abdi, give us a wave. And that period really covers some tough years where we've developed, as Mark said, this organisation has developed, and Abdi's been there for a long time. So yeah, he served his time. I'd also like to. Is Marcus here? I'm ashamed. I'd like to particularly thank my Vice Chair, Marcus, who really did some heavy lifting in the negotiations with the Bristol City Council with respect to the coach house. He really had an eye on all the detail and really argued, and we got a good deal. Ash is over that. We got a good deal. We got a good deal from the council, and that it was a lot of long nights and poring over heads of terms, etc. And Marcus is still in the thick of it whilst negotiating the actual terms of the lease, which has been approved by the Cabinet. I'd also like to thank the executive team who've worked really hard, and their energy and enthusiasm for each of our core strands of work is the reason behind BSWN being able to have the impact it does. I'd also like to thank all of the funders and partners who are working with us, who understand our ambitions and goals and are willing to work with us to help us achieve them. And lastly, I'd like to thank all of you, the communities and members, for trusting us and signing up to programmes and coming to the events we offer and really answering all our calls for data and information and taking the time to engage with us. So thank you. I understand Robin's here. So Robin was partly on the other side of those negotiations at Bristol City Council. So thank you as well, Robin. Yes. So in continuing our report, I'd just like to tell you where we are in terms of membership. We currently have 348 members, and nobody has left since last year, and we've gained 35 new members. That's an increase of 11%. So again, I'd like to thank you all. In terms of trustees, we've had no new nominations or leavers. The only change has been that Abdi has stepped down as treasurer, and we'd like to appoint Paul Kempster. Paul is the head of regional banking at Barclays Bank, and he has is going to step into the role as treasurer. He's also already a trustee. He's been a trustee since last year. So again, if nobody has any objections to the appointment of Paul, I'd like to take that as accepted. Okay, that brings to the close all the official business, and so thank you all.
Good evening. Hello, everyone. I'm Sado Jirde, the director of Black Southwest Network, and I just want to say welcome to our AGM, and thank you so much for being here. So I think you have on your tables, you have our impact report, which is fairly detailed. And I think Marty has provided the more contextual presentation. So I'll just try to whiz through our impact report to just kind of give you a high level in terms of presentation, reflecting on the year that we've had, both successes, but also some of the challenges and our plans going forward. Okay. So for those of you who are new to BSWN, and I can see new faces, Black Southwest Network is a racial justice organization based in Bristol and fairly focused on addressing systemic racism. We specifically work with racialized communities, and our primary objective is to build a strong, dynamic Black and racialized communities, both in terms of organizations, but also in terms of enterprises and leadership within individuals. So, as Marty highlighted in her report, what is our approach as BSWN? As an organization focused on racial justice, over the years in terms of refining and trying to deeply understand what are the ways of kind of dealing with issues around systemic racial inequalities and what are the meaningful approaches. And I think being an evidence-based organization, we have come to the realization in terms of focusing on taking an equity-focused approach, which we do across the board in terms of our programs, in terms of policy, but also in terms of our engagement. But at the same time, focusing on community wealth building, and not just in a financial sense or economic sense, but ways of building communities, both in terms of economic, financial, cultural, but also infrastructurally. So the focus more is around policy, systemically, but also building in terms of building communities. So high-level impact. And again, I think Marty kind of highlighted some of the successes, and fairly broadly in terms of our engagement around policy, informing, and providing voice within structures and institutions, intensely working with businesses in a very targeted way, providing support, increasing our fundraising capabilities, and in terms of fundraising for BSWN, the 1.2 million, the 1.4 million, I think for me as an organization, perhaps centers around ways that we really think about how do we evolve organization, which historically as Black organization, which is still the case for a lot of organization, being deeply grassroots organization and not having the scope to grow and to scale. And I guess in terms of achieving the milestone is also to remember the investment that we've brought in, 30% of that investment going directly to frontline organization, and some of the partners are in the room. So it's not just to BSWN, but also how do we pull in investment, but pull in investment to the wider sector. The ultimate goal and the ultimate ambition is to increase that to 50%. So we're delighted that we're 30%, but the ultimate goal is, in terms of our fundraising, is to ensure we get to the 50%. And part of that is how do you scale BSWN, but we're also scaling the sector too. So what are the core areas of work for those new to BSWN? We have 4 core areas that we focus on. We have research and policy, art and culture and heritage, sector development, which is the infrastructure work that we do, and alongside that is enterprise and innovation. So in terms of our research and policy work, we have a very strong focus on community-led research. And part of this is how do we build the knowledge, how do we build access to research so we're able to influence and able to effect change. And again, from the work that we've built on in terms of undertaking research, but the most significant work is being able to secure investment from UKRI in terms of building our research capabilities. So focusing deeply on what policy in action means, we've had a very strong focus on housing, but also focusing deeply on access to justice. In terms of housing, that has involved delivering social housing drop-in sessions, but at the heart of that is building knowledge and advocacy in dealing with housing inequalities. And we've had significant engagement in that space and very successful in terms of the workshops and the engagement, and hoping to replicate the same approach to access to justice, working, for example, with Liberty in terms of responding to predictive policing, but crucially is how do we build scrutiny and accountability in our work. So it's not just policy, but also building the knowledge at the community level so that people are able to ask the right questions, but also building an element of accountability across the board. So we're starting with housing, access to justice, but hopefully replication of that across the board in education and other areas. In terms of arts, culture, and heritage, again, it has been an evolution. From the research that we did in 2020 around decolonization, in building that to the vision of the Anne Museum, which is a concept, which is an idea of broadly reimagining ways that we curate, produce, and consume heritage from a racialized perspective. With that vision and with that ambition, we've been able to secure investment from the National Heritage Lottery Fund, which is part of our development phase, but also been able to engage and test in some of the programs that we delivered last year, our autumn program, which was hugely successful in curating spaces around heritage and culture and arts that we can begin to build and think about the limitations of cultural institutions, working in collaboration with those institutions, but also broadly reimagining ways that we can build spaces, both physically and digitally, that can begin to realize the vision of the Anne Museum. In terms of sector development, that has been consistently a strong part of BSWN and perhaps our infrastructure role. And key to that is around sector development, working with organizations, unlocking investment, and working collaboratively to also build the sector as we develop as an organization. And there are some organizations in the room working with us in terms of developing the black sector in a meaningful way. And again, going back to my comments earlier is how do we begin and deeply understand, and perhaps that's the conversation with funders, that we really build the sector and evolve organizations from being small and grassroots, but also scaling black-led organizations. Enterprise and innovation, again, broadly in terms of our ambition around economic justice and community wealth building, led by the team, mainly focusing on delivering targeted support to entrepreneurs, to businesses, and we've had a lot of successes in terms of incubator programs, but also in terms of direct business support around the businesses that have engaged with our support. I think core to our ambition around enterprise and growth is to be able to build more long-term sustainable programs. I don't think we're there yet. We've been able to secure investment from different parts to be able to build that part of our program, but key challenges still remain around black and racialized businesses, around access to finance, access to support, and perhaps the growth of black businesses from ideation to startup, but also scale. And that continues to remain a challenge which requires significant investment to really develop and scale those businesses. The Local Access Partnership is a more practical example of one of our programs, which in partnership with key partners in the city, very much focusing on supporting social enterprises, but also helping them access social investment, but also working with social investors to really deeply understand some of the systemic challenges around social investment, and what are the ways and the new ways of growing and developing social enterprises. So this was a 2-year pilot, a lot of learning, similar to the enterprise, and we're looking forward to working with partners for the next year, which is building the learning from the pilot and then scaling some of those social enterprises. These are just high level, and I'm not going to read them. I think you'll find them within the impact report, but just capturing some of the responses from organizations and individuals that have gone through our programs. In terms of Make It Work, again, this is a fairly successful project that we did with Bristol City Council, and very much looking and focusing on procurement and commissioning within adult social care. So we did research, and then we did pilot project with key organizations in the city, but at the same time working with the team at Bristol City Council in terms of deeply understanding, we believe, in terms of the broader ambition around economic and inclusive economic growth. There is huge potential within procurement and commissioning, but there's also significant under-engagement by black and racialized minoritized, whether it is businesses or social enterprises. And this was a fundamental good example of strategic intentional working with Bristol City Council in terms of both understanding some of the challenges within the system, but also providing targeted support for those social enterprises. And the outcome of the pilot was hugely significant and very positive. And I think we're in conversation with a number of organizations who are interested in terms of learning, but we might also be able to scale the program to have a bigger impact. And then finally, the Coach House. I think Marty talked about the big milestone in terms of securing the lease for the building. But beyond the lease, I think it's also the success of building a space in terms of renovating the incubator space and creating a space for engagement and creating the space that it is today. We have bigger ambitions for the building, but I thought just a reflection of what the space has been and the impact that's generated through just being in the space. So finally, some reflections in terms of moving forward. I think key is the finalization of the lease, but also the bigger ambition of raising the investment. We never took the building or sought the lease to just manage the building, but to actually secure the investment to transform the building to be an enterprise innovation hub. And with that, we still have a target of 4.5 million to secure, consolidating some of our work across the region through the research network, through the Race Equality Action Network, but also deepening our impact around enterprise and the more broader sector development. And also in terms of other parts of our work, which is the policy, the scrutiny and the accountability, and building the learning that we've had so far. And I think that's me. Thank you for listening. A massive thank you to our funders, to our partners, and most crucially to the organization, the individuals that genuinely engage with BSWN. It is because of you that you make the work so beautiful and engaging and give us a reason every day to do this. So a massive thank you from the bottom of my heart.
I just wanted to make a point, and Sado, you have a habit of underplaying how excellent not only you are, but Black Southwest Network is. And I wanted to make a comment about the Make It Work program, because you just said, oh, I'm not sure if it's really it's really done well. Well, I need to tell you that the Make It Work program has been highly successful. A few months ago, I walked into the office of the Director of Adult Social Care to ask him about some information around the care providers that we have here in the city. And he revealed to me that as a result of the work that BSWN did on the Make It Work program, Primeware Care, which is led by Muna Abdi, here in the city, is now the largest domiciliary care provider of commission services in the whole of the city, right? So, and that would have never happened if we did not have the interjection of the Make It Work program. And that's what we want. We want to see Black organisations on top and leading the way. And so I just want to say, it's an excellent program. Just continue doing what you're doing and make us it's not fairly, it is successful, and the success proves it for itself. So I just wanted to make that point. Thanks.
Someone else something else she understands herself, isn't it? So serious big round of applause for holding this organisation, for growing it, and for building a great team, Sado. You can keep the applause going for 3 minutes because the next bit's supposed to start at 7:30, so we're good. No, that would be painful, I'm sorry, I couldn't do that. Well, thank you very much. So, the panel bit, Race and Philanthropy, or I like to call it, where the money there? So, we have 3 of our 4 panellists here. We have an apology from Shane, unfortunately, but then we've had a bit of musical chairs going on as well with the lottery, the different institutions. So Ali will also be able to represent. So, do you all have speakers' briefs? Are they on there? Do they get this? Is that internal information? I don't know. Is that? Well, actually, on your piece of paper, you should have 4 names. 3 of them are here. So I'd like to introduce and invite our panellists to come and take a chair, starting with Nelly Koko-Konan. There you are, please, Nelly, from the Proactive Programs Manager at the Cloth Workers Foundation. the cloth. I'm intrigued about the history of that organisation for a start, but thank you. Ali Torabi from now National Lottery, but he would have had a different name on there. I mean, in fact, you can tell us about lots of different funding organisations, Ali, can't you? Thank you, Ali. Abdou Sidibe from Paul Hamlin Foundation. We've all heard of them. Right? You paid a few mortgages around here, Paul. It's good, it's good. So Shane is the fourth person. He has sent a statement, but I think maybe rather than read the statement out, I think we'll just get started with the discussion. Does that work all right? Yeah? Yeah, we can fill it out. So the topic of the night is really, has anything changed, particularly since 2020? For those of you who don't know, who sat, and I was one who sat and watched it on the telly, everybody knows about the Colston statue that was toppled from over there. Everybody knows where it was? For those that didn't know where it was, but did everyone know where it went in the river? Literally like here. And if you think about this big hunk of metal that was dragged all the way from down there, rolled all the way down. These people were on a mission.
It wasn't that hollow. It was hollow. Sorry, young one, like it was hard work. It wasn't hard work.
The city council has to play it down, innit? They were the ones running the criminal damage thing. Was it poacher turned gamekeeper? Is that what they call it? Well, anyway, that event marked something significant. Obviously, in the light of lockdown and everything else, it was very apparent. I guess people were more aware and people were more connected to what's going on in the world. The death of George Floyd, the pain of that for all humans cannot be underestimated, how that was. But it did also mark a massive shift in a consciousness of lots of organizations, lots of people who suddenly became aware of the black struggle suddenly, which a lot of people are like, But actually, and my argument is, in lockdown, everybody was black for a minute, in the sense of, you walking down the street, you can get arrested. Just for a minute, a moment of empathy. So that was almost 3 years ago. So the question, I guess, is they're changing lots of realms, but in the realm of philanthropy and funding, has anything changed? So if our panelists, maybe a quick introduction to what your fund is. We'll start with the simple ones, and you can talk about all the different networks you've been a part of, Ali. So, Abdou, if we can start with you, please. What's your organisation, and how does it work in as far as...
Okay. Good evening, everyone. So I'm Abdou Sidibe, and I'm the Director of Grants at Paul Hamlin Foundation. I've been at the foundation for about 14 months, and I was at the lottery before that. But I worked in the charity sector for much longer. So I'm the Director of Grants, so I oversee all of our funds or grant open programs. And the Paul Hamlin Foundation was founded initially by Paul Hamlin, who came as a refugee to the UK. And he started making a success publishing books in colour. Cookbooks actually in colour. So that's how he made his fortune. And he started, I think, with probably £50,000, and it's grown to an endowment of nearly 900 million. So we are a large private foundation, but there's other larger funders like the National Lottery. So in terms of the programs that we have open, one is around migration, and again, it's about the legacy of Paul Hamlin, who came as a refugee. And I think we're one of the few funders who fund, work with migrants, refugees, asylum seekers, and that's a commitment that will remain. Another aspect he was really passionate about was supporting young people, so we have a youth fund. And he was also really interested and passionate about the arts. So he wanted to open access to the arts. So we have an access participation in the arts. And his first initiative was to open arts, culture to social workers and their children, and that they expanded to just wider communities. Another aspect is also working in school settings, but using arts and looking at supporting young people to find other ways of thriving within education through the means of the arts. So it's partnership between education settings and arts organizations. And the fifth program is around supporting entrepreneurs. So again, because he was a successful businessman, started just with a stall on a market, so supporting individuals who have great ideas and just giving them some financial backing. So individuals get about £15,000 to develop their ideas and get the space really to do that. So that program's been paused for a while, but that's going to reopen soon. So I oversee the team that makes the funding decisions around all of that. And all our commitment really is focused on social justice. So our vision is around a just society in which everyone, especially young people, can reach their full potential and have fulfilling and creative lives. And racial justice, anti-racism is a core part of that, especially the last couple of years.
Thank you. We'll come back round again, I'm sure. Nelly.
Yes, hi. So my name is Nelly Koko-Konan and I'm working for the Cloth Workers Foundation. So I think we're not quite well known, but what is quite specific to us is that we are linked to the Cloth Workers Company, which is itself very much linked to the financial institution in the City of London. The foundation itself is an independent registered charity, regardless of strong linked to the Cloth Workers Company. My role within the foundation is around program management, and at the moment I'm working on our racial equity programs, but I will also tell you most of what we're doing is around capital funding, and this is how we got involved a few years ago with Black Southwest Network, and that's the ballpark of our grant-making activity. So we're pushing through the door about 10 million every year, and the vast majority of that is going towards capital funding, whether that be building refurbishment or the smaller kind of project, providing a lot of laptops during the pandemic as an example for organization transitioning to working from home pattern. What can I tell you? We've just launched a strategy, a 5-year one, and we're at the end of year 1. And I think that's quite important because it was heavily impacted by the last few years. So what is new about this strategy is placing equity at the heart of everything we do. And there is definitely an element of racial equity and racial justice. So yeah, I think that's enough for an overview.
What is the Cloth Workers Company?
So the Cloth Workers Company is a financial institution, and they have their own philanthropic activities, mostly linked to the textile industry. And their philanthropic activities now are mostly related to innovation in the textile industry, as well as supporting universities. So for example, they have a strong link with the University of Leeds. And yeah, that's the overview as well.
Merci beaucoup.
You're welcome.
Ali.
Hi all, I'm Ali Torabi. As of 2 weeks ago, I started in lottery, so I am apparently now representing lottery, but Abdou has worked there far longer than I have. And Shane, who has sent this statement, knows far more about lottery and thankfully is back in the lottery, In terms of personally, I came into philanthropy from trade union movement after BLM. So I was like, if you want, contextualize it, one of the racialized hires to diversify the organizations that I came into. And I came into it it's not as fair because I don't know as much about it to talk about lottery, but to talk about Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust and Lankelly Chase, where I have worked at. I came into Joseph Rowntree as those conversations were happening between all of the 3 Rowntrees, so Reform Trust Foundation and Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust, about what to do with this history of links to slavery and plantations, and essentially a completely contradictory history to what Quaker-led foundation had told itself about its history and its community and what it was doing.
What was the deal about Lankelly Chase? You worked there, right?
Yeah.
What was in the nutshell? What's the story there?
What's the story there? So, essentially, unlike Paul Hamlin, where the family are still involved, or cloth workers, where the company still has a link, Lankelly Chase was set up by 2 essentially property developers, and over time they passed away. So post-2020, there have been new trustees that have come in, and before that as well. And the decision that Lankelly Chase trustees made was to essentially give the whole endowment away instead of functioning as a perpetual foundation, giving 2% or 3% a year, to give the whole endowment away. So that's where it was.
As a result of its own soul searching.
Yeah. And I would say as a result of who is on the board. Because like those soul searching is happening everywhere, but a lot of different foundations are coming to different solutions and different answers. It's the people that sort of, the leadership of Kelly Chase is they sort of faced this soul searching and said, well, our personal solution is that this is not our money.
Fascinating. Interesting, but fascinating. So, yeah, we'll come back around. Stand by with questions, by the way, peeps. That 2020 line, 7th of June.
Without the weight.
7th of June 2020. Who was, or it's more like, because it was heavy. It was heavy, innit? Like, me and you couldn't do that, innit? Like, anyway. He's not my brother, though. He ain't heavy, he still ain't my brother. Anyway, 2020 line, what shifts did either of you notice wherever you were at the time?
Well, the shift. Where do I start? Well, it's interesting because I was working at the lottery at the time. So bearing in mind the kind of institution that it is, and it's linked to the government, so it's still an arm's length body, but it's still very close to the government and the direction. And at the time, we had to pause all the grant-making activity and think about an emergency response.
As a direct result of BLM and...
Well, it was because of the pandemic, you see. And you see with the data time, I'm just thinking, what started first? Was it the pandemic and then the murder of George Floyd? So it was all at the same time. But even through then, that started the consciousness about what kind of reach did we have? Because obviously a lot of the communities that were first dying were racialized communities. So again, in terms of the shift, there was something personally for me. I was born in France, so I had family already that I knew people who were dying in the early days from the disease. So it was quite difficult internally for all racialized staff who work in funders, foundations, very often minorities, where you don't necessarily feel seen or recognized, and no one was really talking about the potential impact. So we had to also think about what's the response as an organization when you're not really considered as an individual and the impact it has. So some of that energy has helped to change some of the culture internally over time. So one of the shifts was looking at the data purely. Where the lottery was claiming that it was reaching all communities, they realized that actually we're not reaching racialized communities. And that's where Sado came into the picture from our perspective at the time, where those organizations challenged the lottery saying, we don't feel recognized through lottery funding because our experience of applying for funding is to be rejected usually. And now we're in crisis. The communities we're most connected to and able to support, we haven't got the resource to do that. Yet you're supporting the bigger organization. So we had to look at the data and realize that actually we were not as connected as we felt that we were. So that led to the conversation about the Phoenix Fund and then the Phoenix Way, really. And I'm almost like...
And the Phoenix is a specific initiative, isn't it?
Yeah. Which Shane, and it's unfortunate, isn't it, that at the time he was in the organization, so we were colleagues, and he's the one who instigated that opportunity, you see. Yes, I'm Paul Hamlin now. Yes. But again, I think the lesson is that internally people have been challenging the internal systems and cultures to say enough is enough. We need to change the practices. And so the shift almost is the shift has been more for our white colleagues and white leadership. But for people who are racialized, it's always been the same. So when you talk about consciousness, I think all of us are thinking, well, yes, racism is something we experience all the time, and now you suddenly realize that the funding decisions, how it's made, we really have to reflect on how we do that. One is who's around the table to make those decisions? Do we look like those communities? And very often when we were not, the funding wasn't going to those communities. So there's been progress from that sense of that consciousness. So I'd say it's been a catalyst, moment. And I think a lot more organizations looked more into their own data, really looking deeply into who are we actually funding, what is the size of those organizations, where are they located, and very often at that time, at that point, you would realize there would very often be organization down south, and very often white-led organizations. Even though some of them may be doing work with racialized communities, the leadership would often be white-led. And if you were funding racialized communities, the value of funding would be much smaller than you would for any similar kind of work with white-led organizations. So we couldn't move away from that. There's been a lot of soul searching within all those organizations, including Lankely Chase. I think over all those years, I've been reflecting hence that decision now.
Thank you. Nelly, were you at Clothworkers in 2020?
Just about.
Okay.
So I had an in-person interview that time when you were doing that, because COVID was already a thing in March, and then I officially joined on April the 1st. So that was right the time when I joined. So I guess that there's kind of a personal story to it, and then I will kind of transition to the Clothworkers one. The first thing is, so I worked in the US as well, and I worked for a long time in London, and I sort of always take diversity for granted, perhaps because I was not as close to power as I am in this very traditional institution. So I think working in London, it's a diverse enough city, and I was within a diverse enough communities that I did not have to challenge myself on a daily basis as whether I'm black, mixed race, or white. When I've reached the Clothworkers Foundation, working from home, because that was April 2020, within a few weeks, I start wondering if I was the only black staff, which again, I'm not bringing like the colorism and how light or not I am. That's the question suddenly that became very relevant to me just because of the meeting I was attending, because of the trustees that I was getting to meet. And that was a very challenging question to have to ask myself, because that's not something that ever come to my mind in any other work environment in the past. So that was the first personal challenge for me.
Which would normally be a thing, but then in June 2020, along comes a very racialized moment for the world.
Precisely, and I think what happened, precisely I think when we started having those conversations for us, it was very much linked to the COVID-19 pandemic and to the grant-making response that we could have to that. The murder of George Floyd came just right about after that in the timeline that I had. I think the challenges there was an acknowledgement that we had to do something, but clearly not the strategic resources in place, and clearly not the staff or the understanding of what was happening within the communities and the tools to change our grant-making practices quickly enough. That being said, I think we did it well enough, but my role never been the one I was employed for. So right away, I was strategically working on the COVID-19 response, which was fascinating, but definitely mentally hard, because as you're saying, I'm French as well, like the wave were happening in different within a different timeline within Europe. My dad at the time was kind of stuck in Ivory Coast because of the pandemic as well. And I don't think there were any kind of recognition within mainstream white-led, city-based institutions that perhaps the black staff that were suddenly strategically leading from a junior place, were going through a lot of personal challenges as well as work challenges, because leading on racial strategy when you're the only black person in any institution is not something that makes any sense or that is in any way sustainable or wise. It's just not strategically sound. So I think in some organization that was happening and that was challenging. I think what come out of it for the cloth workers is a new governance model that I do believe is a better one. Mainly, I mentioned the cloth workers company till 2021. Only cloth workers company members were sitting on our board. Through those conversations, we have opened the board to external trustees, which is definitely a strong step in governance. I was discussing with Ali because that's a practice in other grant-making institutions, welcoming paid co-opted members, so you can definitely have people who understand the work frontline, but also paying them, not welcoming them as, volunteering or getting an opportunity or this kind of odd narrative as working with people. So we do have paid co-opted members now on one of the committee that I'm managing anyway. So I think governance is definitely something that has changed. I think it's very fragile, and I think it's had changed across other institutions, but I think that's definitely something important. Trustees and committees and people taking decisions have tried to shift a little bit how they look like, but I do insist, I do believe it's fragile. It's happening, but it's fragile.
Ali, I mean, practices was mentioned, strategy was mentioned. You were about to say something anyway.
Yeah.
But the question I'd like to tack onto that, have real changes had to be made from those organisations in order for them to be more equitable in terms of who gets
Have they happened?
some support? Have they had to be made?
So the basic question is like, and this is like, philanthropy is an interesting beast because it's fairly unaccountable. Like, if you got independent endowment, the only fear that you would have in terms of accountability is from charity commission, and that's why you can understand some of the understandings of risk and all of that. You are giving money out for past whatever, how many 100 years, as long as we've had capitalism, money has made more money. So like, money will make money, and that is like outsourced to financial institution and asset managers and city that will do that. I think what happened in 2020 wasn't like unique to philanthropy. It was like the whole of, and pleading as an Iranian, Western society realized, oh, we have this history. And it sort of, for me, it was very obvious when I came to when I came to Joseph Rowntree as one of the first racialized program managers. My first question to them when they told me about this history and they are talking about this was like, Rowntree was a 19th century confectionery business in British Empire. You have recognized the links to slavery, but you haven't recognized the labor conditions. A lot of other things were wrong as well. We just have to understand that a lot of where these money come from is from exploitations of different kinds, of different people, and of the ground. Like, whether the money was taken out or whether oil or whether it's minerals or anything else. But like, to go back to your earlier question of what changed,
What had to change from those funders? What did they notice they had to change?
I think they noticed that visually they were whiter than they wanted to be.
Does that matter? In real terms?
In real terms, they are reputationally want to have the thing that, somebody like me or somebody like us is part of the team. Whether we are in the decision making, or whether that decision making has transferred is a different question. But I think, and going back to again Western countries, as an Iranian, there has been this thing about diversity and having somebody there that has been there for the past 30 or 40 years. So you've had it with battles over football teams and black players, battles over all of these things, and I think it finally arrived at philanthropy, and the easy solution that was in the space was have somebody of color be here in order to for us to not look as bad, and then the question comes of the struggle of people inside and all of that. The other thing that I wanted to say also is the other thing that I saw from not being in philanthropy and just coming into philanthropy that changed is, okay, there was 6 months to a year of shock. They didn't know what to do, and some money was going out, and bless people that were in those organizations, because I think it fell to working class and racialized people to try to understand how to get that money to those communities that are really living in substandard housing, that are dying, literally dying. I remember my off-license of the Turkish Cypriot paper that from the second week of COVID had all of the pictures of aunties and uncles that were passing away. And that was, far before, that was when we still had wash your hands and sing a song. But the thing that after that 6 months changed is training happened and the language changed. So like for me, interestingly, Black Southwest Network is like describing itself as a racial justice organization. In 2018, radical. In 2023, chilled. Like it's not usual, but like the racial and justice and all of those usages is like, if the biggest corporations in the world can say they are for racial justice and the grassroots group says they're for racial justice, then the words have lost meaning in terms of like, have been co-opted fully. And that's the other thing that has changed. They sort of, maybe the power hasn't, but the language is the same.
Any questions?
Yeah, I think in terms of Lankelly Chase, because I read about when they made that decision, but I still think that there is an issue about even the percentage of that 900 million, because they've made the big statement, we're going to support social and racial equity, but I can't remember the figure, and you can find it, you can Google it, but I know that there are a lot of black organisations that were not happy with the amount of that 900 million that will be directly targeted at racialized communities. So it's like they're giving one hand and take with the other. So it might be altruistic, they're giving away the money over 5 years. If they said, I'll give the 900 million and we'll disseminate it across all racialized communities, then
Just to clarify, the 900 million is the size of Paul Hamlin endowment.
Yeah, the endowment of,
Lankelly Chase is, these things go up and down, right? They're like in capital markets. It's somewhere between 100 to 130 million. And then they're deciding to give entirety of that away to other organizations, other entities that will transfer it, essentially. So it's sort of one entity that was holding it is no longer one entity, but it just...
So are any of these entities black-led? That's what I want to know.
But also, did you not, they don't know yet, they haven't done it yet, because they're going over the next 5 years, but did you not say they were a property development company? What was their ethical problem then?
I think that was more about the sort of trustees' explanation of it, and I can give you that as a staffer. I was never involved in those discussions, but the sort of argument that the trustees were making was about philanthropy as a whole, that is investing in capital markets, and then 2% of that goes back to...
So not even to do with the provenance of their money?
No, I think it's not directly, it's not the case of like Joseph Rowntree or other places where you go, there is money directly linking back to some exploitation. This is more about how you essentially, I think the question that like trustees were really struggling with is, how do you resource social justice? And how do you resource it in a meaningful way? And who has the right to hold the capital? Like, is that right to the historical organization that has originally was set up and has a staffing and certain culture and certain background and all of that stuff, or are there better ways?
And also the question is, how do you do that in terms of social justice when your investment practice creates harm? So if you have an investment portfolio, you invest in, I think in one of the airlines like Boeing, for example, yes, they build airplanes, but they build arms also. So how do you know that money is not used to do that? Which is really hard. So it's like we all live in a world that's extractive and exploiting people. We all hold the phone, and all our phones, it's children in the Congo are mining cobalt. So if you invest in those kind of things, like inherently the original, the practices that we have now are contributing to social injustice, and then we use philanthropy to reduce some of the harm. So what Lankelly Chase is saying, like, it's difficult because it's like almost, we're not best placed, but even that question about investment approach, how we do that, wealth, what does that mean? Do we have to accumulate constantly? Like somebody else should be asking those questions, and it's those people with the direct experience of those oppressive structures, we should do that.
Maybe can I step in with the investment comment, which is really important, because I think one of the things that has changed as well is organizations shifting the focus of their conversation from grant making, which is usually what everyone understands on a basic level when we talk about philanthropy, to challenging themselves. So that means having conversation within the board as what are we doing with the endowment and what are we doing with our investment. So for example, at the cloth workers, there were no conversation at all like a few years ago when it comes to impact investing. So of course, we are investing and we're managing the portfolio externally, as you were mentioning, but now conversations are starting on a practical, tangible level as how could we move our investment towards something that is impact investing and is more in line with the mission that we have with equity at the heart. So I think that is definitely a massive change, which to some extent has a lot more potential that grant-making program, because in terms of how many, in pound value, like the investment is actually what organizations should be scrutinized on, as opposed to grant-making, which is such a small budget line to some extent.
Thank you, Nelly. Paul and Sibs.
Thanks for that really important discussion, some great insights, and thanks to BSWN for even forcing organisations like yourselves to even be here talking to us.
We're inviting, Paul.
I wanted to start by saying
the
that.
food was there.
The game away.
I wanted to start.
Where are you?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I am. So my name is Paul Hassan. I work for ACH, which is Refugee Integration Organisation. One of the questions I got for the panel is, how can you get to the holy grail of encouraging collaboration between organisations rather than incentivising potentially, competition with, limited resources and in almost indirectly create an environment of hostility and distrust rather than building a kind of collaborative approach from racialised minority refugee-based organisations? The second bit of that question is, how can you use funding to ensure sustainability and a sort of self-driven ethic within those organisations? Is that a conversation you're having? And if so, how are you going about delivering that?
Yeah. Two big questions. Well, one of collaboration, partnership. I guess, interestingly, when I worked at the lottery, one of my roles before I left was around partnerships and how you create an environment and a condition for organization to work more in collaboration. But I think the key issue is the system we work within, because of the exacerbating issues, social issues that we face. And actually, in terms of resources, although all of us combined probably are quite wealthy, in the sector, it's actually nothing, is really small. So we end up in a situation where people have to compete to do the same work very often. And I think there's a cultural issue where we're asking people to demonstrate through an application that they are better than somebody else. And I think to these days, how do we create maybe a way of creating funding where it's about recognizing who you can work with together and how you share your resources. Some of that can be financial, but not always. You can have, actually, BSWN, as an organization, the resources you have, your volunteers, your capacity, you offer that to smaller groups. So how do we encourage more of those organizations to work in the same way? And I think that sense of generous leadership, and it's missing. And I think we need to be more vocal about seeing that. But also to create an environment, funders have to do the same. And I don't think we're very good at working in collaboration as funders. Sometimes we fund the same organizations to do the same kind of activities where we could look at sustainability in a way where, if we limit it in terms of the kind of grants we make up to 3 or 5 years, and if someone can do longer, how can you sequence that so the organization have that sustainability, but their experiences with the multiple funders is almost seamless. So these conversations are taking place because we're seeing the fact that actually since the pandemic, the demand has increased exponentially, not necessarily the wealth we have with it to respond to some of that. So we can't continue on that treadmill of just, looking at application one after the other, trying our best to make the decision for an organization in terms of what they do at the local level. It's not sustainable. And especially in a context where the government is not investing as much, which means that you have to pick up some of those gaps and services, which means you have to come to private philanthropy for some of that. So I think, again, the whole architecture, the whole context, the whole system needs to be completely dismantled to rethink how do we build communities that thrive now with the wealth that we have. So it's not necessarily an answer, but I think it's a recognition of the real challenges that we're facing there. But there are opportunities and great example of people who are really aware of that and looking at it at a more local level.
I think for sustainability, if I can step in here, what funders can do, and it's something we've been working on, is multi-year strategic core funding. So I think that when we talk to organizations, this is something that is needed, unrestricted grant. So I think on the funding side for the philanthropic institutions, some of us are having those conversations, but for me, that's kind of critical to be able to say we're going to invest in an organization, not like project-based or very specific outcome-based, but how do I understand your strategy? How do I understand your vision, your ambition, and how can I understand, with unrestricted money, what is that you're already doing, really well, and you will just thrive. So for me, multi-year core unrestricted definitely comes as a valuable, tangible, strategic answer, I think.
So, second question first, philanthropy is the first place that I've worked in that sort of wasn't self-sustaining, and charity sector. So in the trade union movement, I was at 38 Degrees, it was all based on small donations and memberships. And we have historically gone to a place where most charities are relying on grants. And then when most charities rely on grants, they are competing on grants against each other. And that's completely, as you recognize, in the refugee sector. And I would say this as a refugee also, there is some element of competition that is competing to deliver same services, and it's wholly unnecessary and wholly it could get challenged. The funders could get challenged and the sector could come together, but there are also other competition where I go, well, fair enough, where people disagree with each other about what to do with a social problem. And the civil society and charities that exist are different ways of us coming together to push different answers. So there's a side of competition that I think is totally unnecessary, but there is for example, you would know this, and anybody who has worked in the sort of refugee sector knows this, there are 3 or 4 organizations with wholly different approaches towards detention. And we can all agree that sort of detention is not something that we would want, but what is a policy answer of, do you have detention for 40 days, or do you wholly get rid of it, and all of that? I think that's where there is competition, and I think that's where sometimes funders dictate a line, which is unhelpful a lot of times because they're not best placed. So yeah, I would go to that.
Thank you. Question here. Close this to the mic, I think. 1, 2, 3. Is anyone here?
Should I? How far has the law helped philanthropy in the last 3 years, or has it been more of a deterrent or a problem?
The law.
The law, yeah. Regulations, policies that, say, for example, the Charity Commission, the Fundraising Commission, how have they helped, or how have they been detractors?
Law and policy, I guess, because some of it's law, some of it's just policy, I guess.
So I think you have different funders that have different risk appetite. I would say, Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust, as Quakers, they always saw themselves as helping and supporting the really causes that are not in favor. So, they helped charities that were challenging the fact that Guantanamo Bay was there and the people were held in Guantanamo Bay. Something that other charities and other foundations wouldn't support. But I think the thing that we have in reality is over the past 5-6 years, we have had a government that is looking at charity sector and campaigning and funding and wanting it to essentially be less noisy and less bothersome. And that has an impact on people because, not only staff, but trustees, because if you are giving money away, the thing that you don't want is a news article that says you are wrong for supporting this organization. The thing that you do want is, either nobody talks about it, you definitely don't want to be in a national newspaper. So I think that's the thing, rather than law and policy, this how government attitude and how media portrays some of the risky, funding or those decisions is really changing how people behave.
So informal political influence.
Yeah, the campaigning, I was just going to add, because it's interesting, so for us specifically, where we get most challenges is through our migration fund.
Yeah.
And we get articles, so we had one in Daily Telegraph earlier in the year, criticizing some of the grants we were making. But I think the risk actually, it's the organization that carry most of that risk. So for us, because we're independent, I think we can take that, we can take a stand to say, we're not going to change our decision. But it's hard for an organization on the ground to face that, because there are risks to the staff also, can get targeted in the community, those sort of things really. So I think even though there is an impact, I just don't think it's necessarily for us. We just probably need to be braver by standing behind the organization we fund, being clear that we'll continue to support them. And same for those who are, supporting young people who are, questioning the gender or, those sort of aspects. So there's specific kind of culture wars that are going on where people are looking at the funders, and we get regularly emails, letters, usually not named, anonymous, criticizing our stance. But I think it's an opportunity to demonstrate where we sit on that sense of social justice, oppression, and actually we should be more vocal, and that's what our organization we support asks us to do.
At least hold your nerve.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Andalor Shakon. I'm the CEO for Bristol Black Carers. And as a small organization, when the 2020 happened, funding came. The way how people looked at approving funding changed. 3 years on, it seemed as though they're backtracking. And all the good work in terms of collaboration and working towards being partners in terms of funder and provider is slipping. Have you noticed that in some of the organizations or your organizations in terms of how they are approaching things?
Do you want to
say? The short answer will be yes. That's a strong yes. I think on a practical level, we were discussing before, there were like two responses, like what almost all of us called the COVID-19 emergency response. And you're right, money was kind of flowing through the door thanks to that mechanism that you call shock. So I think that a lot of things were happening behind closed doors, with staff definitely trying to push money through the door, and that's a good thing. I think the challenge that came right after is how do you make that move sustainable? And there's a lot of staff or boards anyway who are failing to carrying on with that job. And that's definitely, I think, a conversation. I always talk about resistance. And I think that, there were kind of many boards get shocked and they had no other solution but. So the money went through the door. And then you had like that phase when everybody was doing their strategic work, and I think that came as an opportunity to perhaps dilute a little bit of the work that was happening, and that came as an opportunity to stop engaging or not to renew. There's like so many different ways to say the same, but what we're saying is the money not coming in the way that happened. I don't really have a solution for that, but I can confirm this is happening. This is not all of you thinking, am I seeing something that is not in the room? I think it's happening, yes.
Yeah, I agree strongly as well. And it's interesting because I think when I reflect back, I think a lot of the conversation in 2020, they were about the debate between equality and equity. Then people started to understand what equity means. It got more comfortable to say, we need to reach out, we can provide more support because the starting point of some of those organizations is different. But 3 years on, then the language or the conversation start to change where people are saying, but what about climate change and what about... So I think there's a lack of understanding of the intersection between all those issues, that racial justice is across all of it. So then I think even for us, where we're part of wider conversation about the funding sector and practices, you can see a bit of tiredness. People want to move on to something else now. So I think it's the cultural work that says like racial justice is about racial justice. You know, we can't say social justice and not consider that racial justice has been done now. We've done our funding, which has been shortened for 3 years. We want to move on to something else. I think there's a lot more cultural work to do at leadership level to really understand this isn't something we need to walk away from. It has to remain and be embedded. And this the embedding that's really the hardest bit that I think we're getting, well, slowing down, getting stuck. And I think that's why then you see staff who look like us who are, after a while, will leave, you know, one after the other, they get disillusioned. So it's just a reality in which we are. But yeah, so it's interesting you're seeing that because, yeah.
Just one thing. So I always, sad state of being Iranian, you always live through revolutions and counter-revolutions. There's always one happening. So like when BLM happened, and for me the like pop culture moment of it was everybody started kneeling, and that was one thing. A lot of people in power stopped kneeling much faster. But for me it was like the question was, when would footballers stop kneeling? Yeah. And then after that, that's where the moment has finished. The wave of that moment is gone, and then the retrenchment comes back. And I think there is something real about, like, if that isn't your lived reality, if that isn't what you're passionate about, if that isn't what you're going to get, like, if I go down the street, get asked about, like, what is happening here, what is happening there, then it is easy to move on to the next big thing. And environmental justice, like, God knows, it's big, it's huge, it's all over the world, it's happening to us, and we need to do something about it. But then you have the thing of we can focus on one thing only. And that one thing isn't intersectional, that one thing isn't deep. It's like we just need to learn about one thing one time and then do it for a few years and then move on to the next thing.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for coming down. And I don't think it was a challenge. You're some of the most...
Just ask.
You're some of the most amazing people in philanthropy, and it's a privilege to work with you. I think, just on reflection, it is a mixed bag, having been around for quite a long time and perhaps having a deep understanding of funders and being in the space. I think we've made some progress in terms of the reflection, the investments, and different elements. And I'm just wondering strategically, of course, funders would want to move on, there's all of those things, but strategically, what can we do to kind of build on what emerged from those conversations, BLM, activism, all of that, because we were all in different conversations, and I think few things have changed. So strategically, what can we do? But I also feel there are some positives. So, for example, with City Bridge, funding for 10 years, and understanding this is generational work. So you're getting funders also shifting and understanding this is generational work. So how do we connect those two and push for that deeper understanding? If you're working in racial justice, it is generational work, it is long term, there is scale, there's all those different elements.
First of all, shout out to Kadra at City Bridge and the Anchor team for pushing that. Because again, that thing of getting between 3 years to 5 years to 10 years is a lot of internal push and battle. Like, we all know it. It hasn't happened in a lot of organizations because a lot of times, to come back to your question, the internal people that are internally placed that can push to a certain extent. They need external pressure to be able to push through. There needs to be external noise and scrutiny, and that's the thing that changes the space. Because we would have been saying the same things when we started, but the external context changed that. I'm going to ask Rob to do the noise, but like the statue that started bubbling up and down into the river, that changed. And, you know, understanding you can't recreate that moment. That moment is a moment in history and sort of happens once. But the other thing that is real is, and I would say this not as a lottery person, but You need an inside game and you need an outside game. And you can't get to be around the table and go, we're around the table, so we're going to succeed. Because if the outside game and if the noise and if the pressure isn't there.
Any other responses?
Yeah, just to add, almost, it's funny, I was going to say that, but I think strategically what it shows is like hope and possibilities. That's what it is. It's like, so the people internally, despite the system, they still believe in something that can be different and they demonstrate what's possible. And very often when you see that, you pick it up, you want to do more of it. And I think there's lots of examples of organizations who do exactly the same. So for us, internal conversations we have is about how do we embed more of the hope possibilities in the work we do? Because we haven't got the funding to support all the social issues or to fix the system. But what we can do is demonstrate what's possible so someone else can pick it up or we do it collaboratively. And I think that's what I see, like really inspiring leaders. And if you think about the future, the young leaders are here, young people, they know what needs to come next. They know things have to change. Yesterday I was at an event in Manchester with migrant organizations, and some of the young people were there are so clear about what the future requires. They're so clear on the issues and how connected they are. So they don't talk about intersections or they don't think in silos. It's just who they are. That's how they speak. It's quite clear. They know how to organize and they know what change needs to happen, but they haven't got the power at hand to do that. So I think for us as funders is recognize that and really think, the strategy is not what's on the paper, it's about hope and possibilities and how do we support those who are doing that. And very often it's the groups that are here who are doing this and for many years haven't been supported.
Okay, we're not going to get time to get through all of them, so can we just hear those questions really quickly? Just throw them all out and then hear whatever they want to answer, they can answer.
Yeah, my question is around impact investment. You talked a lot about funding.
Yeah.
And Sado's point when she went through her presentation is access to finance for business. And I wonder, you're holding a lot of money, and wonder if there's been any shift in policy around where that money gets invested, and whether there's any there's lots of a proliferation of black-led investment funds. Is any of your money going to them? Because that would impact on the organisation we support that, but not in the voluntary sector.
Just hold that question, please. Hold that. Let's hear another question. We'll get through some more.
Hi, my question sort of follows on from what the lady just said. How much influence I think you mentioned that obviously governments are involved sort of in these decisions about where money goes. So how much influence is there politically when you're making decisions about funding?
Okay, hold that, please. Got those?
Yeah, many of the businesses that we work with mainly struggle with translation, meaning that whatever they write, they feel that the funder doesn't comprehend. So, or is it the funder who's not comprehending what the businesses are writing? So somewhere we have a language issue, and obviously, if we are migrant communities, English may not necessarily be our first language. So how do we address this communicating clearly, effectively, succinctly on writing 50 words, and the funders being able to not just see the words, but see the potential impact in those organizations? Because if that's not really supported, then majority of the minority-led businesses are at the mercy of bid writers.
Okay, so language access, political influence, and black-led investment. Was there any more burners? One more here. Another here. Two here. Abdi has to have the last one.
So I'm really interested in the way that these organisations are focused on optics of
the funders. The funders.
The funders, organisations themselves, the leaders in those organisations are focused on optics of having somebody that looks like you in the organisation. I want to understand a little bit more about where is the maturity of that conversation? Is there a connection being made between not just having a face that looks like yours, but having the quality of intervention from those people that actually drives social justice and racial justice?
So is your diversity high, just superficial, or does it go deeper? Final question, please, Abdul.
Just looking forward, maybe in 10 years' time, do you think that you talk about change, the language change, new faces people change? So do you think that it will be just only a risk management exercise, or it will be a change that brings and tackles, makes fundamental changes to the system that created this? Or are we just going to hope that A and I actually will do the social justice for us?
Short-term change, longer, the deeper change. So, if you can remember any of those, whoever wants to take them.
Okay, I can. I pick a few one. I think for us, on impact investing, I can say confidently the conversation is starting, but that means I can also confidently say that we are not doing it as we should or as we could or as we will, hopefully. The conversation is starting in a practical, tangible way, and I think that for us that's a good step. Like, that's a step I understand, that's a step I'm supporting Gov, that's a step I keep an eye on. It's happening. I can say something on risk. I think that's quite interesting because I'm never sure if I'm using the word. For us anyway, at the cloth workers, that's a risk management exercise. I think it's becoming a little bit more healthy now that we're challenging ourselves for a long time, but certainly the board and our policy to get clarity on what we actually mean. And I think that's really important because I don't think that it will be healthy to say, we're just taking X, Y, Z risk. What we're saying is, are we calling risky every single Black-led organization and what comes with that narrative? So I think that's the conversation that we're having. And for us, for example, are we also calling political every single Black-led organization because they are Black-led and we don't do politics? So I think it's kind of a risk management exercise, yes, because we're so linked to the Charity Commission and we have all those governing bodies, but I think it is just a narrative that needs to be deconstructed and pulled back together in a helpful way, but it remains a risk management exercise as I understand it. And then is that a cosmetic shift? I think within some organization, yes. Do we know that as staff or management or senior leaders? I think yes, we're up for the job. Yes, I think one of the things that I'm always pushing personally is changing governance. So what are the recruitment system that we have for our board? Definitely a lot more than for the staff. I think recognizing where the decision is coming from is very important. I think quite often staff are kind of the face of the organization, but the power remains in the board room. So I think for me, that's definitely a topic I'm passionate about to understand, how do you join the board? What's the recruitment process? What the skills that you bring? What's your personal experience? What are your values? So all that, I think, especially livery companies of very traditional organizations, we're definitely not there yet. Absolutely not. There's a lot of tap on the shoulder when it comes to recruitment, and that's not how you build diversity within a board.
On your question about optics, yes, I think they do realize now, but unfortunately that's because very often there's been the tokenistic appointment, and after a couple of years, those people leave. Now they realize they can't do that, and now there's a shift in really embedding and really creating diverse teams. And there's also interesting initiatives that are being funded, like a 2027 program, which is an opportunity looking at getting people from working class background into the funding sector. And the reason why it's set at working class is because you get a lot of diversity in those intake. Very often they're younger and they learn about ground making. And it's fascinating the lens that they bring in because of the communities they work within. So I think over the years, it's going to change. Naturally, it's going to feel different. And actually, I do feel like it feels different. And even the organization I work in now, we are a diverse team. And it's very different to what it was when I first joined 5 years ago. So I think we're on the right sort of direction of travel. But there's still more to do at board level and at very senior leadership. So when you look at chief exec level, it's not really as representative as you would want from a gender perspective, race perspective. So there's still more to do. It's the same thing, I think, on language and, how do you get organizations to really get understood in terms of their work. Again, if you diversify those teams, the lens is different. The way they look at it, the conversations they have, the questions they ask are very different. So the lottery, you know, with all some of the negative aspects at times, they've made progress with their regional structures because they have people who live in the regions who reflect maybe a bit more the communities, and they're able to access some of those communities a bit more because they know how to have a conversation. So when I work there, you know, again, being French, speaking another language, you just have a different lens that you bring. So again, that consciousness about what you look like as an organization should be reflecting of the communities you want to reach. And also, an application doesn't have to be in writing, so there's people trialing different ways of engaging, telling your story. And it's much more powerful to go and see the work, to be honest, because it's hard to put it in writing. And I think some of the principles, I think some are focusing a lot more on how organizations work and their values as opposed to what they do. So if you're a big writer, it's easier to write the activities, what you do, and polish it. But actually talking about anti-racism principles and how you put communities in the lead, and it's much harder, and you can pick that very easily in your assessment. So there's a lot more change around the way assessments are being made. On impact investing, I think the Pathway Fund actually is a really interesting opportunity like that to recognize the lack of access to finance for black-led organizations. So a couple of funders have come together to kind of generate this sort of opportunity to incubate and support black-led organizations. So I think there's pockets of possibilities there, but then it's how do you grow, sustain, and maintain those kind of initiatives. And then I can't remember the other, but maybe you will. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, so I don't know which order I'm going to, but like on impact investment and investing, I think the interesting thing is, like, for me, always like simple version, 95% of the money is in the city making money. That is managed by probably 10% of the staff. So you have 1 or 2 people that are working on investment, and then you have 80-90% of staff on operations and grants. So the basic reality of like foundations is that the grants team are just much larger. So you don't have necessarily that capacity and capabilities to interact with investment sector fully always in the team. So it's a lot of times outsourced. So I think, if you're thinking about advocacy and how they using their money, asking them to bring that stuff in-house and diversifying that, because that sector is like, it's another thing. On sort of bid writing on the back, like, I think it's both the side of like, yes, there's a lot of language problem, but I think there's also a lot of intentional misreading. There's sort of, this doesn't chime with me, and because there is like such fierce competition, there's always something that like, could be like better, in quotation mark, slightly to go, I'm going to go with that one. So I think it's also a question of not what is written, but who is reading it. And that's that, and who's setting the criteria for the person who is reading and all of that stuff. On AI, I mean, like, historically, like, I think every time we have technological advances, those in power have been the first adopters, and they have propelled themselves forward. And I think probably that's where we are now, when we see all of the stuff that is happening with OpenAI, which sounds like sort of Succession drama. The reality of it is, as long as those things are so far away from the communities, those technologies will be done to us. Thank you, Sado, for...
I thought we were out of time already. We've got another 5 minutes.
And then the final thing I wanted to say, the question of politics, how politics is involved, it's just, you have to just put yourself in the minds of like trustees and those people who are making the decisions. They haven't come to charity sector and foundations to be political beings. They are not the local council or somebody like that. So I think a lot of times when the politics comes and intersects with like grant making, they really don't know how to behave and what to do. And for me, the thing that sort of Abdou said is absolutely right, of like, the role of the foundations is, if you have assets and you have resources, support those who you're supporting. And then if you are in the communities, tell the foundations that they're doing a good job when they do that. Because like a lot of times people see like, Paul Hamlin coming and going, we're going to fund, migrant organizations. And like a lot of people go, oh, that's good, well done. glad they're doing that, but like nobody tells that, and that positive reinforcement of telling the foundations like you have to stand strong, and when you stand strong we see you, really makes a difference.
Wonderful, thank you very much. And then it just remains to say for us to express our gratitude for our panelists of Abdi, Nelly and Ali.